All right, now our next speaker is a benchmarking advocate who inspired the collaboration between PSQ and the Global Benchmarking Network to organize this summit in order to highlight the COVID best practices around the world. He is one of the moving forces who advocates the need for global cooperation to address COVID-19 challenges.
Our speaker has led major private sector change initiatives in marketing, information systems, and consulting capacities for Control Data Corporation, General Mills, and Xerox for over 20 years. He has produced more than $50 million in sales revenue and is also a business advisor and mentor for globally focused startup businesses in the state of Minnesota and beyond.
Here now to talk about the COVID-19 global best practices, discovering global solutions, please welcome the President of Global Leadership and Benchmarking Associates and a board member of the Global Benchmarking Network, Mr. Dale Weeks.
Well, good morning to everyone in the Philippines, and good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may happen to be these days. If you get my presentation up, I will begin. It's a pleasure to be with you to share the results of a recent global benchmarking initiative that I completed over the past summer on COVID-19 best practices across the world, as indicated in the title. We're just going to look at discovering global solutions and building a coalition for collaboration. It's expanding on what Frank just talked about regarding SPI. So in the interest of brevity, I have about 15 to 20 minutes today, so let's proceed. Next slide, please. As initial introduction, just so you get an idea of who I am, this slide is from a picture taken in India in April of 2013. So as our introduction indicated, I worked for private and public sector, and most immediately in the last 10 to 15 years in the public sector, and helped start our Baldrige Performance Excellence Program 30-some years ago here in the state of Minnesota, and then it expanded across the U.S., and now it is internationally. You will note my overall focus on performance excellence anywhere on the planet. That's why I'm here today. So this is me, the global context of the U.S., and you see I've had a lot of exposure to other countries as far as performance excellence is concerned. So let's proceed to our agenda for today. Next slide, please. And I will quickly go through three major agenda items in my time with you today. The first is learning from history. That's what benchmarking really is about. And so I want to spend a few moments on what is the meaning of excellence today by a gentleman who I got to know many years ago and really has helped expand my horizons on what is performance excellence. So I want to spend a few moments on a definition and then get into the COVID-19 best practice report that I put together through the summer, where I get to the point, as my father used to say, don't wait for the wolf is at the door. But in terms of COVID, I think today the wolf is at the door, if not inside the door. So that's going to be the analysis of the conclusions I came to on the best practices report. And then we'll move into the more relevant and important part, was a proposed solution, as Frank was talking about as far as SPI. What's our solution? A worldwide collaborative vision, and put it in the context of, many of you have heard the phrase over many years of going to the moon and beyond. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. Please think critically and strategically with me in going to the moon with this visionary context. Open up your minds to what's possible worldwide. Think visionary, dream a little bit, be an enthusiastic optimist. So put on your performance excellent hats and enjoy the ride here today. Next slide, please. Who is this man? You probably, if you look at this picture, maybe you haven't seen him before, possibly not. Only a few of us in the United States are aware of him. He is known back 50 or 60 or more years as one of the most strategic, excellent thinkers going back that period of time. He worked for one of our presidents in the United States, Lyndon Johnson, in the 60s, and published several exceptional books on excellence and leadership in our complex world. What did he have to say? Let's proceed. Next slide, please. So this is a definition. These are statements from not yesterday or last year. These are statements from 1961 in his book on excellence. Look at the inspirational approaches to excellence here. Broad, far-reaching, focus on all aspects of society, of our national and global society, business, government, healthcare, not-for-profit, education, and all of the professions, from your local plumber to our heads of state. So the question I'm proposing today is, do you, those of us with us today in this conference, do you embrace and endorse such a broad conception of excellence? Look at the words here. Every degree of ability. Mechanics, someone who comes and fixes your home. Pervasive, universal, everyone in every walk of life. These are not dream world. They're published 50 to 60 years ago. So consider that as our performance excellence COVID mandate on a global scale. Next slide, please. Now take this and those definitions down to the recent study that I completed over the summer. With those thoughts in mind, move to the results of the best practice report I published officially about September 15th. These are, I'm going to deal with today, are the summary results. All of the 40-page or so report is available to everyone who is registered for the conference today. You will note here in that report, there are two categories of assessment. The top 10 and selected honorable mention. I'm going to be talking about 2 or 3 in the top 10. We'll have time later in the conference to talk in our panel discussion about some of the others here. How was this study conducted? Robin Mann at the beginning talked about best practices and definitions regarding our GBN. How did I go about this? It was mostly desk research, multiple sources and articles across the world. We live in an internet world where you can find out massive amounts of information. I did the initial research. I had discussion and email exchanges and calls with GBN members. Use of our Baldrige Performance Excellence Framework here, starting with the first element of that framework, which is leadership, an explicit definition of best practices. So beyond what any given country was doing, I looked at results and data. Frank earlier talked about data in the S. This is data of best practices. So you can see the report for the details of what that data is. Why these rankings? Why did I rank them this way? These are close. You can find other rankings in the COVID arena. Why did I choose these? Of Germany and New Zealand at the top, primarily at the beginning because of leadership. You've seen the statements made by the Chancellor of Germany back in March to get the people together. Similar in terms of the Prime Minister of New Zealand. They've exceptional leadership there. And so what I want you to think about beyond those that are there today is the major nations that are missing here. You don't see the United States anywhere on that list. You don't see the United Kingdom anywhere on that list. So beyond that, excuse me. Just get a drink of water here. Look at the map of the world. There are close to 200 nations. Frank, in his presentation, SBI said they're dealing with 166. But if you take the round number of 200 nations in the world, as reported by the United Nations or the World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, top 10, fine. But how do we get some of these best practices from the top 10 or the honorable mention to other places? How can I and the leadership here in the United States, we just had an election, we've got a new president coming in, how can we get them to the point where they will say, gee, what did they do right in New Zealand or Germany or Switzerland or South Korea, and get outside the benchmarking term that some of us have heard frequently, called NIH, not invented here. Best practice learning jumps over that barrier. Let's go to the next slide. Here are some of the major findings and conclusions at a summary level from that session that I did. Major conclusions from a people management, humanity, and global citizen perspective. What those that are doing well told us. Sustained leadership for national progress to occur. I don't think anyone would argue we haven't had sustained leadership in the country that I sit in, the United States. We've had states doing things, national doing things, it's all over the map. Citizens of the world deserve a quantum leap in performance excellence. Frank talked about survival of the planet on SPI. Quantum leap in performance. If we say we only got 20 or 30 years, to me, the citizens of the world are telling us an ultimate survival, saving our next generation. Or to put this in other terms, if I say the name Greta Thunberg, many of you will know who she is. 17-year-old teenager who spoke at the United Nations last year and said, you adults ought to be ashamed of what you've done to our continuing to do in our country. So we in the performance excellence community, to me, have to step up. 51 years ago, the United States put a man on the moon. Where is our man on the moon equivalent for getting a solution to COVID-19 and similar crises? So John F. Kennedy in 1961 said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I say, in his words again, go forth and lead the world. Ask not what your planet can do for you, ask what you can do for your planet. Next slide, please. And then just the overall finding, to put this in practical terms. A few weeks ago, there was a typhoon in the Philippines. I used to live in the state of Florida. We had typhoons or hurricanes there. So given there to be a global change agent, check the data today. Look at any dashboard on COVID. Millions of people are dying. We've had close to 250,000 deaths in the 7 or 8 months. That's more than in most of the wars, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, and other wars that the United States had fought in. Or as my father used to say, don't, as I mentioned earlier, don't wait until the wolf is at the door. Today, I would say the wolf is at the door, inside, ready to devour our families because of COVID. So what do? Next slide, please. And some of the additional reasons, and this capitalizes a little more detail on what Frank had to say. Mere survival and mediocrity is a lead to manage our nation. Yeah, we get top 5 or top 10 that are doing something, but the USA and the UK, their management of the COVID crisis has been a disaster. I don't think anybody can argue with that. With 250,000 people, we can do better in the performance excellence world and giving best practices. We need to deploy the best practices in global programs on a global scale. Otherwise, as Frank sort of indicated in his presentation, otherwise we as performance excellence people, I truly enjoy coming to these conferences. I enjoy being a member of the Global Benchmarking Network. But if we're not having an impact on those social outcomes that Frank talked about, we are holding ourselves up to be irrelevant or instinct. Global partnerships are the only solution. Frank talked about that. Or recently during September, October, Bill Gates from the Gates Foundation, very prominent in the whole area of COVID, put out his Goalkeepers 2020, it's sort of a dashboard, and said there's no such thing as a national response to a global crisis. We must work together to end the pandemic and begin rebuilding our economy. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this stuff. Because we can't do it. I can't do it. Even the President of the United States cannot do it. We need to build a focus. Okay, next slide. And then we get specifically now into the recommendations that I had in my report. Worldwide performance excellence recommendations for 25 to 50 years, or take it back to what Frank said with SPI. Take performance excellence to the point of 2050, 2080. Build a Performance Excellence Sustainability Institute. We've got a lot of performance excellence organizations across the world. There's probably 45, 50 or more. But as Frank indicated, and if you look at the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, SPI, I don't think any of them could stand in front of you and I today and say, what is a performance excellence framework? They have no idea. So I'm saying we as performance excellence professionals need to take our message to these organizations. I heard some people, a few weeks ago say the WHO should not exist because they're not managing COVID. Look at the map of the world, and you've got 10, 15 countries that are doing well, and all the rest are in a mediocre state. So let's look at how do we get our performance excellence message into some kind of institute that is partnering with these organizations, including the Gates Foundation, and then lead and manage COVID-19 in these frameworks so that we can say it's not a top 10 or top 20, but we can come back in 5 or 10 years and say we got 150 nations that are applying proven best practices. If you look at the report I did, we looked at Singapore, we looked at Taiwan, we looked at other countries. How can we get not 5 or 10 or 15? It's mandatory. Otherwise, we're back to a situation where our world is in a state of it's not going to exist. So let's go to my final 2 slides here, and then I'll be open for questions. Next slide, please. So to conclude a little bit, think of this familiar quote in terms of what I'm saying today. Some men see things as they are and ask why. I dream things that never were and ask why not. That's a quote attributed to Robert Kennedy in the 1960s here, as well as another author in literature, George Bernard Shaw. So there's room for all of us, for everyone in the performance excellence community, but we have to get out and focus on impact. And so it's not only for those that are in the choir of performance excellence, it's for all of those, as John Gardner said in 1961. And you can see and hear more about the references I've got here in my 40-page COVID best practices report. Read it, review it, critique it, send me your comments. So the last slide, please. This is who I am, where you can contact me and explore your common performance excellence issues for COVID and beyond. I look forward to hearing back from many of you on this report and its recommendations. Thank you. Have an extraordinary rest of the conference, and I'm open for questions if we have time for them now. Thank you very much.
Performance excellence straight from a global benchmark. Thank you, Dale, for that insightful speech. We are now opening the floor for a short Q&A. Please submit your questions to Slido using the code 45616.
Okay, now our first question for Mr. Dale. How important is the global supply chain and fast-changing landscape of digital transformation to be at par with the global benchmarking best practices?
Well, I think global supply chain is one area you would certainly have to look at when dealing with private business and so forth. But I think the broader thing is when you look at global supply chains, and one of our prior speakers talked about different process improvement areas you can look at, Six Sigma and all of those. As I mentioned in my report, the history of a lot of our performance excellence and tools and techniques, and I call it flavor of the month. You may have a current focus now on supply chain, and then you'll have a focus on process improvement and different things. But they're valuable in and of themselves. But what we face in terms of continuity of performance excellence, how do we build an entire framework? It starts with leadership. It gets into logistics management, which is supply chain, and all of those in a broader framework. A lot of organizations have done wonderfully in supply chain, but their leadership is not where it should be, or their positive movement. So we have to broaden our scope and say, we've got, these frameworks to look at. John Ringrose is going to talk here in a few minutes about performance excellence frameworks, and the story is not as positive as we would like in terms of the broader framework. So I endorse supply chain management, but I'm more focused on the broader context. So it doesn't go away after 2 or 3 years. You do supply management and then you're done. And then where do you go from there?
All right, for our second question, can you explain the importance of interdependence and human-centeredness at the forefront of best practices?
Well, if the question is interdependence, that's all there. That's my quote I had there on Bill Gates, is that we each in our own areas. Here in the United States, we have evolved to the point where a lot of the direction in terms of COVID performance has been left at the state level, or even in some cases, even at the local level. Whereas you look at best practices that have occurred in other countries, whether it be New Zealand, whether it be Germany, whether it be some of the Pacific Rim countries, they've had a lot of willingness to come together at a national level. So I think the interdependence is, we all travel. We all go from one place. We're in a global connected world these days. So we have to have a solution that affects all of us, especially for COVID. It's not unique to one specific area.
I see. And finally, we have one last question. In terms of global solutions, how would we solve the employability and transition of young people from school to work? And does this have a long-term impact on their employment prospects and earning capacity in the future?
Yep, that's an area that's been around. Many of you would know this whole quality arena and performance excellence for a long time. To me, that's next generation transfer of knowledge. How do you get this performance excellence stuff or the framework down to K through 12 level? So I just did a presentation here about a year ago to a school in Pakistan. How can you, it was defined, it was done many years ago here, quality circles in the United States. But how do you get these frameworks so people think in terms of how to manage and begin to get that K through 12 educational framework in there? So when they go into the work environment, they're able to do pieces of that and help extend this beyond. Otherwise, it becomes the transfer of knowledge is not occurring. There was a lot of effort 20, 30 or more years ago to get quality into schools, and there were pockets of it, but it didn't sustain itself over a period of time.